Kingston Town can't win.
Bonecrusher and our Waverley Star, stride for stride.
Cometh the hour, cometh the legend, Winks has done it.
We're joined here by legendary New Zealand trainer Frank Ritchie. Frank, thanks for joining us and thanks for having us on your wonderful property here.
Thank you for coming along. A pleasure to have you here.
So this podcast is all about the best of the best, and we can't start any other place than the 1986 WS Cox Plate. It was dubbed the race of the century. We'll start the scene with the quote from legendary scribe Les Carline. Two red horses blundering up the straight, caught in a hell of their own making, a place beyond pain, beyond exhaustion, and beyond sense. Frank, let's take it back to the beginning firstly. Can you tell us about his purchase and the involvement of Harold Hampton? You followed a different path with some of the attributes and qualities that you were looking for, is that correct?
That is correct. Actually, it was Peter Mitchell's idea. He'd raced a few horses and got a bit sick of slow ones, so I thought he'd seek some advice. Harold was, he wasn't, shall we say, sought after at that stage, but Peter had some, thought he had some right ideas, so he approached him and said, now, can you do it? He had this theory that it started about 100 years ago through pedigree and worked its way to the ideal horse. So when he picked out Bonecrusher, as an individual, he was just another horse in the ring, but he was not an impressive horse, and neither was the pedigree. But Peter wanted to go ahead because that was what the doctrine was.
Got some guests.
Frank, what do you think the making of Bonecrusher as a horse was from his progression to the lead up to the Cox Plate in 1986? What do you think his making was as a horse before that? Do you reckon it was on that day, or was it done before that where you knew you really had something special with him?
Oh, no, you don't really. I think you only know if a horse is special when he actually does something special. And he was always showed me something, obviously. Won his first race, which was an 800-metre 2-year-old race, and he really wasn't a 2-year-old, so that gave me some indication that he could be handy. And, as time progressed, he showed what he had. He won a group race, a 2-year-old race here at Ellerslie. Actually ran second, but interference, and he beat the then leading 2-year-old. And again, as I knew he'd be better over ground, I thought, well, that's a pretty good effort. It gives me an idea of what his class is about.
We'll go to the build-up of the race. Our Waverley Star and Bonecrusher, they were the two champion horses from New Zealand. Talk us through that immense build-up. Our Waverley Star did get the better of him on one occasion over 1,200 metres at Ellerslie, but Bonecrusher did have the better form here in Australia. Did you see it as a two-horse race?
Absolutely. We were acutely aware of Waverley Star's ability and what his connections, who were top-class horsemen, thought of him. And they weren't at all frightened to take us on, and you had to take them very seriously. He won a race before he came over, and he just walked in and ran a track record. So we knew that he was the real deal. The only advantage we had on him, we felt, was distance. We felt at a mile we'd never beat him, and at a mile and a half we'd have it on him. So the mile and a quarter of the Cox Plate was going to be a pretty interesting race. So yeah, we were very aware of him, that's for sure, and we knew that those top horsemen, the O'Sullivans, knew their game, so it wasn't going to be easy.
And the money came for, I think Bonecrusher was $1.90 to start and jumped at $1.90 on the day, but the money did come for our Waverley Star. So were you always confident that your mighty horse was had what it took to win that race that day?
Not at all. In fact, we spent hours upon hours upon hours of trying to work out how we could beat him, or how we could stop him beating us. Now, that includes Gary, myself, the owner, who was a punter, He knew a lot about racing, and he was part of the deal. So we, as I say, we went over that and over that and over that. What we hoped would happen would be right from the start of the race as a hot pace, because we knew we could outstay him. We could never outsprint him, but we could outstay him. So we needed it to be hot, and it started off that way with the mare that I just forget her name that led, but started to ease the tempo. So Gary, and we'd had 1,000 plans, by the way, prior to this about how it would pan out. Completely went out the window when Bonecrusher, he didn't miss the start, but he missed half a length, and that costs you a couple of areas you could want to be in. And so all the best laid plans can diminish immediately. But Gary knew at that half mile point that if he didn't go then, he'd never outsprint him. So of course, as you know now, that Lance saw him coming, and it was all on from there on in. Obviously, as it turned out, it was the best thing for us. I think if he'd waited to the 600 or 500 to tackle, Waverley Star would have won by a couple of lengths, just primarily for pure pace.
So you said you had one of those 1,000 plans. Was how it played out one of those 1,000 plans, or was that something that just you hadn't really accounted for at all?
Yeah, well, the plan obviously relies on the rest of the field too. As I've said, we thought the pace would be good, and it was, but not for as long as we anticipated, and so that's what a good jockey's about. He's got to adapt, and Gary, of course, he knew the horse, but more particularly he knew the other horse, and it was brave. Not a lot would have done it, because if he'd beaten us, he'd been crucified, Gary, for doing so.
I think it was evident watching the race back, what you touched on about our Waverley Star having the better sprint, because he did take off, and Bonecrusher was under the whip, under heavy riding, and it looked as, for a few strides, that our Waverley Star had his measure. Did you always think that Bonecrusher was going to run him down?
I knew. No. There's the true answer to that. I knew he'd keep doing so. There wasn't the first time that he was in an awkward position and had to get out and get up and win one of his New Zealand stakes. That occurred, and he got up on the last stride, and he just couldn't on the corner. But yes, I can't say I was confident, but I was at least hopeful that because they'd started sprinting from that point, that if he was going to tire, well, we had some chance for him to tire in that level. But if he'd gone only, as I said, 600 out, wouldn't have caught him.
Yeah. No. And just touching on the O'Sullivans who trained our Waverley Star, was that a healthy rivalry between them, between yourself and them?
Oh, sure. I mean, as we all know, and I think in any competition, you can be the best of friends, but you can't beat me. So, we're all out there, particularly Cox Plates. I mean, they're one of the top races in the world. And, we desperately wanted Bonecrusher to become a legend, because he had so much heart, and he deserved it. That's the way we felt about it. Farlap, to make an example, was just a pure freak, and he wasn't a pure freak, a Bonecrusher, but his heart gave him, that all that mana that he had, and so we really wanted to win that race.
And that famous, now legendary race call from Bill Collins around Bonecrusher racing into equine and mortality. Do you think that added some element to the race? And I don't imagine you would have heard that on the day because you were surrounded by everyone, but did you think that definitely added to the race, and it's one of the best race calls we've ever heard?
Oh, 100%. 100%. He was a wonderful commentator. I remember Keith Hobb telling me once he sat on a race that he was commentating, and he said, just before he was having a smoke, and it was a big race, and it might have been a Melbourne Cup, I just can't remember, but he said, I've never seen a man so calm in such a situation, ever. And he said then it was a brilliant call. And, and that's what it was like. And while I heard that at the time, the angle I was on to watch the race, I wasn't 100% sure that we'd won.
Yeah.
And so that had to be clarified before any party started.
And just some of the aftermath of the race, we read a quote in a article saying you went out the back and none of the punters were in the ring, in the betting ring. They all stayed for the ceremony. What was the feeling like when Bonecrusher came back to scale?
Oh, amazing. I remember seeing coming down and, the crowd was everywhere and the press, wanted all, and they always want the different questions. You ask the different questions to make print. But Dave O'Sullivan was just come out behind me, and we turned and we hugged. We were, rivals and worked as hard as we possibly could to beat one another. But that magic moment, we hugged, and really meant it, And so, that's one of the things I remember most about it all. And then, of course, we went down and all the press are there. And one thing I have to say amused me was Russ. He always the man to want to be in the front line. He walked around with Sean with Bonecrusher, not with Waverley Star, out on the and put his hand up, and that amused me at the time. I thought, oh, Russ, he's a hard case.
Obviously, we've seen some big races at the track, and we know what the valley's like. Is that that cauldron, that amphitheatre? Do you remember what the crowd was like when those two horses went at it at the 600, and what they were like when they came around the corner? Was it just you can hear from the race call that the crowd, but what was it like being there with that and that atmosphere when those two went off at the 600 metres?
Oh, it was amazing. At the time, I'm watching and much more than hearing. Obviously it was, as you say, it was amazing, but we didn't get him until just short of the line. And as I've just said, I wasn't even sure from my angle. So that concentration and virtually praying that he could get that extra little bit of energy was paramount in my mind at the time. But then, even after the race, as you say, the crowd kept, cheering and carrying on, and I remember that part of it. And so it was marvellous.
Bart Cummings came down and congratulated you and said, "That's the best race I've ever seen or ever hope to see." Did you understand the enormity of the win at the time, that it would be the race of the century and we'd still be talking about it some 35 years later?
No, I don't think I did. No, I knew all I could think of was the bravery of my horse to do what he did, and my admiration for him, because as I say, he wasn't a far lap, but he had that huge heart and he had to use all of it, and my admiration for him was my primary line of thought at the time. But yes, you're right, Bart did do that, and there are many moments like that, but that's one of the top.
Yeah, Bart's obviously seen some great races in his time. And you did just touch on the far lap comparison. Bonecrusher was also dubbed the Big Red, which was far lap's name. How did that make you feel to kind of be the second New Zealand champion, I guess?
I thought it was wonderful being even in the same level as far lap. And as I say, I don't think that's accurate, but it's wonderful to see that people saw the horse that way, and the admiration that came for him. And we used to get all sorts of letters from people and people wanting shoes or that, something off the horse to remember him. There's only so many of those, of course, and it was amazing, and it went on for so long, and obviously still is to some degree. So, it all comes down to the horse. We're all just bit players, the rest of us. And, the horse has to, at the end of the day, be the one to do the job. And so, and on that day, he did it.
It was obviously such a special moment for so many reasons, but to have your son Sean there as the strapper of the horse, did that just make it that little bit more special? Absolutely.
And he was, at his beck and call, and we used to walk him a lot. because he was a natural athlete. I never galloped him hard, so just to make up those potential fitness that we needed, we felt we needed. We walked him a lot and took him out, and he enjoyed his afternoons just picking grass, walking, and we keep him out sometimes for a couple of hours. And in fact, I remember the press saying, we were staying at the stable we were staying at. We used to leave him. Even he got sick of us, because when you've got a horse like that, obviously you're always doing something, and he just gets sick of it. So we designated certain times that nobody, not even Sean, and Sean was his mate, that we'd just leave him alone, put him next to a horse that he was happy with, and had a little yard in that stable, and he liked that too. But then the times that we were walking him, we told the press, go for your life, do what you want to do in those time frames. But the horses needed that time to himself.
And after the race, you went on to work for legendary English trainer John Dunlop. Is that correct? And what are your memories from that?
Well, yeah, Sean. I'd met John, of course, when we went to Japan with Bonecrusher, and a lovely man. And spoke to him at that stage about Sean having the desire, and he said, yep, send him up. So we went up once, Colin and I, to there long after Bonecrusher was gone, of course, and wonderful setup he had there, Arundel, and we were. He was very good, and Sean said he got a little bit of a preference there in terms of travelling horses through Europe and that sort of thing, and because he was, I guess, through Bonecrusher, if you like, but he was a wonderful man.
So obviously Bonecrusher was a great Cox Plate winner, but he was a great horse in general. What do you think were the key attributes for him that made him such a special horse?
All right, and just his will to win. It has to be said, Gary had an extravagant whip action, and these days it would be frowned on, and rightly so. But he used to really ask of Red, and he always got. If he didn't get, then I'd done something wrong. I didn't have him at the races. And in his early days, that happened a couple of times, and it really worried me because I didn't identify it at that stage as my fault. But I came to terms with that. Eventually thought, I've got something I'm not getting right here, because the horse has got the heart. And that's...
So do you think he was one of those horses that loved the competition and really wanted to win on the day? Like, he knew he was there for the big occasion and he really wanted to win?
Yes, obviously so, because that's how. But funnily enough, on the track, he was a pretty lazy worker. I could work him with a maiden and he'd stay back with it and be quite comfortable doing so. He didn't drop off or anything like that. He did what was asked of him, but he was quite happy to cruise along quietly and have an easy day, if you wish. And that again makes it was in his favour, because if he was always wanting to rip, because he was a fairly light framed horse, and I didn't, as I said before, I didn't need to work him hard, so it was just as well he could be a cool kid when he needed to be.
Seems a common trait with a lot of champions. They come out on game day. We're here with this year's Cox Plate. Where do you rate the Cox Plate amongst the world's best races? Is it Australia's best race?
Because it's a weight for age as opposed to a handicap, yes, I do. The best go there and the best win it. That's taking nothing away from the Melbourne Cup, but there's obviously a difference in a handicap and a weight for age, and therefore a level playing field. So the best horse almost always wins. If he doesn't, it's bad luck. Look at Kingston Town. He got over his bad luck and still won.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
So how did winning Australia's best race, the Ladbrokes Cox Plate, change your life as a trainer?
Oh, enormously. People still talk to me about it. And, it's a wonderful thing. people wouldn't understand. Probably 35, 37 years ago, and you guys are here, and people still want to talk about it. And it's just amazing. We just went along for the ride. The whole thing is the animal, and he was the one that did it all for us. And when he's got a statue at Ellerslie now, of course, as you well know, and we're proud of that. And every time I walk past, I say thanks, mate.
Frank, we can see how much Bonecrusher means to you, how much that Cox Plate victory means to you. That's all our questions. Thanks for joining us. You're our first guest on the podcast, so you'll be a hard act to follow. Thanks for having us here. Cheers.
Thanks very much, boys.
Thank you.